Okay, Lynn, the next question comes from, and as always, people have to please forgive me if I butcher their names. I'll do the best I can. This question comes from Colonel Alexander Ignatenko, who is the scientific director of the Regional Museum in Kremenchug, Ukraine, which is where V.I. Vernadsky did his early soil studies. And he says, Mr. LaRouche, I would like to ask you the following. Why do world leaders today ignore, number one, the principles of synergy as applicable for regulating rates of development and also regulating the configuration or symmetry of a multipolar world? Two, why do they ignore physical economy generally? Three, why do they ignore the possibility of organizing society based on the principles of the noosphere developed by Vernadsky, Kuznetsov, and Lyndon LaRouche? Where is their scientific outlook? To what extent are politicians knowledgeable at all about these issues? And where are the people who not so long ago were carrying on about sustainable development as the policy for the third millennium?
Oh, now you're talking about the enemy of humanity. Well, he doesn't like to be talked about much, especially when I do it. I seem to put a certain special finesse on it. Since the beginning of a Mediterranean maritime domination of the region of Europe, that relevant part of Asia, and North Africa, which became, it developed in Greek circumstances and so forth. In other words, it became known as the attack on Prometheus, which is Aeschylus reports on in his speech. Now, this shift with the collapse of the Persian Empire, which was predominantly an inland empire with some maritime complications added, you had a shift of the culture of Europe to a maritime culture, a domination by a maritime culture, which became eventually the Roman Empire. From that point, you had the Persian representation in this deal was the cult of Mithra. And the cult of Mithra met with Octavian, the later Augustus Caesar, Caesar Augustus. They met on the Isle of Capri, where goats are raised, horny goats. And which was the place of one of the properties of the Roman Empire in subsequent times. And here Octavian and the cult of Mithra cut a deal, the priests of the cult of Mithra cut a deal. And the deal became what is known as the Roman Empire. In the course of time, the Roman Empire, or the original version, became distressed. So the Roman families, the wealthy Roman families who had survived the various experiences there, moved up to the northern Adriatic into a swampy area. They took their treasures with them. And they lived in this swampy area for a long period of time, protecting their treasures, because the swamp is a very convenient place in which to stay militarily. It's hard for large armies to move in on you. So if you have a competent small army, you can generally take care of the large army who tries to come in. So they remained there. And during this period, you had a new Roman Empire, which was an automatic transformation. They just simply moved the capital from Italy to Greece and beyond. It became known as the Byzantine Empire. And that reigned until about 1000 AD, and when it went through a crisis. And then you had the rise of what was called feudalism in Europe. And this was the Crusader Europe. Now, the Crusader Europe was controlled by Venice. Now, the Venetian interests that controlled Venice were the descendants of the families of the Roman oligarchy, the aristocracy, which had moved to this area in the swampy areas of northern Adriatic. And they controlled the Crusades. They controlled the Crusades very simply by getting the Crusaders to kill each other. They took the leading families, the younger members of the leading families of the European and other nobilities. They got them with this religious passion to go recapture the temples and so forth in Palestine. And they killed each other and competed with each other and decimated each other during this period. It was a merry old time. It went on for some time, called the Crusader, feudalism it was called. But it was all run financially by the Venetian bankers of that time. Now, then the Venetian bankers were not doing so well. This happened at the collapse of the New Dark Age of the 14th century. So we had at that point a Renaissance, which defeated the Crusader element at the time, and began with the great ecumenical council, Council of Florence, established a new system under what became the leadership of Nicholas of Cusa. The Venetians were still there. They had taken a blow with the defeat of the Crusader system, but they came crawling back with their dirty schemes again. And so by using a monetary concept, a monetarist concept, which was the Venetian system, and the Roman system, use this Roman monetarist system, which is based on a maritime culture controlling the landed areas. And they did that. And so this led to an attempt to exterminate the Renaissance. This took the form of the launching in 1492, at the same time Columbus was coming to visit us here. Took the form of religious warfare. It started with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, but went on with the accession of Henry VIII, who was really a pig. He was a psychotic, among other things. He was controlled by the Venetians because everyone who ran him was Venetian. The head of the Venetian intelligence service moved up there and became the marriage counselor to Henry VIII. And that's how some things happened. So now suddenly, the Catholic Britain, so-called Catholic faction of Britain, because they divided all Christianity into two warring parts. One, the Protestant one, and the other, the so-called Catholic one. So now he left the Catholic camp and went to the Protestant camp, allied with Germany. This opened up a period of religious warfare which continued to 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. And that was the corruption of Europe. So this was then led to what? Well, you had this religious warfare. Then you had more of a continuation of that. Then they brought in something which had been established by the Venetians again. There'd been a change in the character of the Venetian leadership to leadership of Paolo Sappi, which became modern European liberalism. Modern European liberalism organized wars, and under the flag of William of Orange, who was a representative of the banking system of the new Venetian Party, and came in with the flag of the new Venetian Party into England and Ireland and committed all kinds of atrocities and so forth. This led, with an organization of a war in Europe, 7 Years' War, led into the collapse of the nations of continental Europe by killing each other and doing nasty things to one another otherwise, and became the basis for the formation of the official British Empire, which then was the empire of the British East India Company. Now, the British East India Company, which, as being established as an empire, became the fourth Rome. All of these different formations had the same characteristics. They were oligarchical, based on the oligarchical conception of the masses of people as being trash. Roman Empire was the first one. The second one was the Byzantine Empire. That is, the first Roman Empire had gone bankrupt. So now they reorganized in bankruptcy, and they had the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire went bankrupt to the Venetians, which established about 1100 AD. So the Venetians then, the new Venetians, took over and ran the Crusader operation, the medieval Europe. That went bankrupt in the New Dark Ages, the great collapse of the 14th century, and then they got a new one. But they got it by starting a war. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain was the first step. This was used to start a pivot of religious warfare. This religious warfare was then extended by the Venetian manipulation of a crazy Henry VIII. Henry VIII turned the war, which a religious war already in place, into a war between the Protestants and the House of Habsburg. So this became, until 1648, a permanent state of warfare, of religious warfare, throughout Europe, which became the basis for modern liberalism, that of British liberalism. So what you're dealing with in Ukraine, for example, today, is a reflection of this aspect of history, in which people have attachments to what they think are certain events in history where they take sides. Oh, this was the good guy, that was the bad guy. But the way imperialism works, it takes credulous people and convinces them that one guy is their real enemy, and the other guy agrees, so they have a war. Or they have conflicts among various groups as war. And so therefore a monetarist power takes over and plays one against the other. The typification was what? First of all, the 7 Years' War. In the 7 Years' War, the Dutch and the British stayed out of the war. They didn't put troops into it. But they ran the war. They ran the war as wars among the nations of Europe. And so by the 70 years of war, Europe was so destroyed by the wars among the nations of Europe that the British walked in 1763 and established the empire of the British East India Company, of Shelburne. And then Shelburne and Company took the process on, and it became the modern British Empire, which was, as Shelburne understood, the new Roman Empire. The British Empire was established literally, explicitly, as the new Roman Empire. So mankind in the transatlantic region has been subjugated to the tyranny of Roman empires from the time of that dirty pig, later called Caesar Augustus, and the cult of Mithra on the Isle of Capri to the present day. So that when you understand this, rather than trying to get explanations on who hit who terms, and understand that the whole thing was organized by a priesthood called the cult of Delphi, the cult of Aristotle, the cult of Apollo Dionysius, the cult of Nietzsche, and so forth. This kind of playing of someone sitting like a priesthood and playing the elements of society in murderous conflict with one another or among one another is able to, by this kind of method, to exert a tyranny over the suckers who don't understand what the game is all about. And that's our problem. That we're living in a situation where this is the British Empire. Therefore, if you want to say, save Ukraine, for example, you say, destroy the British Empire, which is not something that Boris, so forth, would like to do, or Gorbachev would do. Gorbachev likes the British. He's a tool of the British Empire. He was a tool of the British Empire when he was in charge of Russia, or Soviet Union. That's the way history works. And one has to understand this that I've just summarized. Once you understand the implications of this, then you understand what it's all about. It's about what's called the oligarchical system. That some people behind the scenes, under the guise of religion, like the cult of Delphi, set other people into killing each other in murderous feuds with one another. And by playing people against one another, and you get them to say, well, the issue was this guy was wrong, that guy was good, in a war. Both were stupid. The case of our own more recent case, of the case of the assassination of President Kennedy, and then of his brother, who was about to be nominated presidential candidate. Why was Kennedy killed? Because Kennedy, together with Douglas MacArthur, had led a policy which said the United States was not going to become involved in a land war in Asia. And General Douglas MacArthur was the one who laid out the policy, which was the Kennedy policy. There will be no U.S. engagement in a land war in Asia, referring specifically to the Vietnam War. There will be no such war. And he was stubborn. What was the British going to do about this? Obviously, they can kill him. He's stubborn. And Johnson knew that. So Johnson was scared. And he saw 3 rifles that had killed Kennedy aimed at his head, implicitly. So he capitulated and let the war begin. And what happened to the United States in that wonderful war that went on for a decade? A terrible war. And then the Soviet Union, who had observed this thing, was so damn stupid, they did the same thing. They got into a similar war in Afghanistan. And we still have a war in Afghanistan today. Ongoing, a drug war, as usual. Nations have been stupid. People have been stupid. They think of who is hitting whom. They don't think of who is organizing the match. They don't understand who their enemy is. Their enemy is the people who organize this. Empires are what? Empires are not colonial systems. They may have aspects of colonial systems. Empires are for suckers. Empires are financial monetary systems. The idea of controlling the conditions of life, the physical conditions of life, of populations by economic means. They do this, manage this process, and maintain power by being the middleman in terms of financing, so-called, between 2 opposing or among more opposing forces. That's what the 7 Years' War was, that created the British Empire. That was what the British did in firing Bismarck in 1890. The British monarchy did it. What did they do? Well, what they did, they fired Bismarck because Bismarck understood that the British monarchy was determined to have a war between Russia and Germany. And to get this war going by starting a Balkan War and playing upon the religious issues in the Balkans among different Christian religious beliefs, the Catholic as opposed to the Orthodox. Bismarck understood this and assured the Tsar of Russia that as long as he remained premier of Germany, monarchy or no monarchy in the German government, that he would not allow Germany to take the side of Austria in a Balkan War. So the British did the obvious thing. They had him expelled from the chancellery and started a war. What they started was a new war of alliance with Japan against, first, China as an alliance, Korea, Russia, and then in 1922-23, a Japan-Britain alliance for the destruction of the U.S. base in Pearl Harbor. which was done in 1922-23. Now, things got changed because the war that the British were organizing in Europe, another 7 Years' War, wasn't working out too well. So the British found themselves with France toppled as a German puppet because of the stupidity and corruption of the French, actually, which is their real enemy. The internal enemy was greater than the outside. So they started this process. So therefore, Churchill screamed for the United States, the guy he was the British were determined to destroy, above all, to come to the rescue of the British in terms of Europe. So Roosevelt did that, and then this was very unpleasant to the Japanese, who were counting on doing something against the United States with British support. Now the British stopped the support of Japan in the planned war against Pearl Harbor, attack on Pearl Harbor, because the British now had to depend upon the United States to save the British ass. So you got home, hit them in their home base. So they changed their behavior. However, the minute that the war was ending and Roosevelt was dead, Churchill, with his sucker Truman, started the whole mess all over again. And that's how the nuclear weapons were dropped on Japan. As part of this process. So this is what we have to understand. We have to understand these problems are not the kind of problems that most people describe as being the problem. You have to understand that there's a force on this planet which acts like a religious force in the tradition of the cult of Delphi, the Apollo-Dionysus cult, the cult of Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. This cult, based on being a financial power, by creating the idea of money, controlling the use of money, defining money, and getting the suckers to kill each other so that the bankers can prevail. And that's our problem. Therefore, there's only one remedy for this, which Roosevelt understood with his idea of a fixed exchange rate system. You have to eliminate this factor of manufactured war under the control of a new Roman Empire, which is what the British are today. You have to eliminate the new Roman Empire factor. There's only one way you can do it, by the avoidance of wrong wars. Don't start a war for the benefit of your enemy. Don't use the Roman gladiator system of exhibitions of murder in the arena as your form of entertainment and pleasure and government. Because what the Romans did, and every empire since then, all a continuation of the Roman Empire, have done, is to play one people in killing another. And the passions aroused of people against people becomes the tool of the orchestration of empire under the British Empire's control. Once you understand what I've just said, you know the answer.